Hello, everyone. Nybelle and Andrew back again, here to talk about peer support things. Um, so we're gonna start off with another icebreaker question. Um, what's the worst piece of advice you've ever gotten from someone?
First thing that came up, which I don't know if it's the worst, but a recently worse one, is when I was sharing about having um, a lot of self hate. Someone said, uh, basically, just wait it out and eventually it'll go away. And that made me feel even worse after hearing that.
That is really bad advice. uh, yeah, I mean, I think a couple things come to mind, and these are just more annoying things, not like this would have ruined my life or something, but I have a lot of issues with sleep, and like when I talk about that, I swear there's always one person who's like, "Have you tried melatonin?" And I'm like, "Yeah, if you Google like sleep, how to help sleep issues, melatonin is one of the first things you'd see." So I've had insomnia since I was really young. Of course, I take melatonin every night, of course. The other one that came to mind was like, I was in Vegas with my mom, and I think I won like a small amount of money, like $10 or something like that. And I was like, oh, I'm just gonna cash out because like you might as well quit while you're ahead, kind of thing. And my mom was like, no, you gotta like gamble the high stakes. They win a high amount, don't just win a small amount. And then I lost everything. I was like, Mom, what are you doing? Like, I could have had 10 extra dollars and now I have no dollars.
Right. Oh.
So, yeah, that was like kind of, I was so irritated about that for weeks. And I mean, I think part of it was that like she didn't just give the advice; she came over and started like pushing the buttons for me. So that was probably what made it worse. Like,
Not helpful.
yeah, taking my power of gambling away from me.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to talk about social change today. So, Andrew, do you want to kind of give an intro to what you were thinking about for this topic?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of us peers can relate to this experience of being in a system where it's a strong hierarchy and there are people at the top and we're kind of somewhere towards the bottom. And when decisions come up and we're asked for our input, more often than not, people with greater power have greater say. And so we just kind of get like accustomed to that. We just start saying to ourselves, this is just how it is. It's this is the norm. And we, I think, do our best to try to get used to that. Some of us, we try to advocate in the ways that we can, but just because it's so commonplace and it's really the way our society is structured, I think a lot of us feel like we can't really do much about it. Um, but I also see that relating to like society at large, because even when we think about our leaders in government, people today I think
Yeah.
disagree about what's wrong with our society, but I think everyone to some extent does sense that yeah, something's off, something's wrong, and a lot of us we might try to do what we can in our own domains to like help, but or to vote, and that's still good. That's still like critical. A lot of us, I don't think, um, it feels like a lot of us don't think it's possible to go beyond that, and that's because it would take all of us at once to essentially say, we want something different. This isn't working for us. Let's decide what we want. And regardless of who the people in power are at the time, all it takes is for the collective to come together and say that and then act on it. And there's nothing that people in power can do. And when I say all of us, I'm including like all of us. But that's a huge monumental thing. I think as far as peers go, there are even some divisions in the peer community. You know, there are certified recovery mentors. There are peers with lived experience of going through the mental health system successfully, and there are peers with lived experience of being traumatized by the mental health system. And so it's like, even though we're a relatively small community compared to other communities, we still have divisions within the group of peer support, and we still have disagreements and aren't fully on the same page. So even with that being said, I think if collectively we decided that this isn't working for us, this power dynamic that we have within the sphere of work we have, it's not working for us. My curiosity goes to like, what could we create with that mindset? Like, what could happen from that? And I think maybe it could be, in some ways, a harkening back to the peer roots, the CSX movement, because that's the mindset they had at that time. You know, that's the origins of peer support. Them coming together as a collective, saying, this is not working for us. What do we want? What would work for us? And then together as a community, like creating something.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, the CXS movement is the Consumer Survivor Ex-Patient movement. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot there. It's really hard too, because I was even thinking like, now there's also like family peer support. You know, you can qualify as a peer through having supported a family member. You don't even technically, like, in order to get certified, you don't even technically need to have your own lived experience, which kind of can complicate things. And yeah, I think it's also hard when, I mean, just the whole, not just peers, but like the mental health and addictions field in general, it just is like, burnout is so high, and it's hard to like come together collectively when you're in survival mode. I think probably, you know, the advent of like deinstitutionalization and those large institutions and asylums all being closed around the same time kind of gave everyone who was a part of that movement like a unified mission, because they'd all been through something really similar. And now, you know, there's such a wide range of different experiences. I mean, two people can have like a completely different experience at the same hospital even. So it's hard when it seems like things have become so scattered, and not to mention just like other general societal divisions that we have going on right now. I think it's tough, and it's like I want that, and I also don't really know how without like just like giving up my day job, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's hard. That's hard for a lot of people, especially people who are struggling. Like it's not easy just to walk away from that.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, a lot of advocates didn't have jobs. You know, they had a lot more time on their hands. I'm not saying there were advocates who, you know, not like every advocate didn't, but there were and are folks out there who, like, that type of advocacy work is their life's work. That's what they do a lot of the time.
Totally. I imagine some of them were also probably on SSI or some kind of supplemental income to where they maybe could have extra time to advocate and do community-centered work and things like that.
Potentially. I mean, I don't know. That would be interesting to look at. I'm not sure what that looked like for folks who were coming out of the hospitals during that time, like in the 60s.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
What the supports were in place were for folks,
Yeah,
which is probably why they had to create their own supports. Like, the hell am I supposed to do now?
True, yeah. Yeah, I wonder if they supported each other even with resources like food and clothing and shelter.
Yeah, that would be cool to learn about. And
yeah,
yeah, it's kind of like the crisis created that opportunity for folks to come together. So, I mean, we've already been through a pandemic. I'm not sure what other kind of crisis we would all need to come together.
Don't jinx it, Nybelle. Or maybe jinx it, because maybe that's what we need.
Yeah, like another Yellowstone or something.
Oh, geez. A few steps below Yellowstone.
Yeah, I don't know what's in between pandemic and Yellowstone. I don't know if I want to know.
No.
But that's something that I've heard before, that like we need some kind of like shared tragedy to bring us all together again, which it's a little odd to think about.
Yeah.
That's something that is sometimes needed to build that kind of momentum. I think right now a lot of people are craving normalcy, you know, what it was like before COVID was a thing, and wanting to get back to that. And I think that I just see it, like, even just going about my day, like, people are not as nice drivers anymore. People are more kind of just like focused on themselves, like going about daily life, I think. And I also think that's a natural reaction. I also notice it in myself too, so I'm not gonna act like I'm high and mighty about it. I you know, sometimes I'll be driving and I'm like, I'm not letting anybody in. You're not taking advantage of me today.
Exactly. And to be honest, I feel like that even started back when, this is not to offend certain people, but some portion of us feel this, so it's valid to say, I think. When Trump was first elected, I think that's when a lot of us started to feel that as well. The heaviness of that and trying to process through that. And I guess you could say the other side of that maybe felt that heaviness too when Biden was elected. So
maybe. I think part of what
polarized people are, you know, these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it too, like, particularly thinking about, you know, the part of the country where we both live, I think that Trump getting elected was a rude awakening for a lot of folks. And when that happened, you know, of course I had a lot of feelings about it. And one of the things that I did was I was like, I want to understand why people voted for Trump. Like, I want to look into this and understand, you know, what were the reasons. And I think that kind of helped open up things for me a little bit to, you know, think about like rural communities with factory towns that have just been like totally abandoned and there's no support there. And, you know, Trump was promising to bring back these jobs to these towns that were destitute, and, you know, obviously we know he didn't do that, but I could see how like that could be really tempting for folks, especially if the other side is like not talking about that at all. And I think that, we're such in such a bubble in the Portland metro area that a lot of folks didn't even want to try to understand. It was just like, oh, they're just, racist, whatever, like kind of like when Hillary Clinton was like the deplorables, that voted for
Yeah.
Trump. It was just like that. It was just kind of like painting everything with this wide brush rather than being like, okay, let's try to understand why this happened, because then we can figure out, how do we move forward? How do we like come together? And
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a huge issue. Like, it's not, um, isolated to any, side or like
Right.
place on the political spectrum. That's something that a lot of people are unable to do or consider, is like thinking about what is going on in the mind of somebody that I really don't agree with.
Yeah. 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 In the sense, I like how you brought that up because so much of this stuff is interconnected. People who I just feel like I think a lot of people feel this way, but it just hits me. It's like the system is failing, and we're all trying to approach it from different ways. Like our different life experiences kind of color the way that we approach it. And so someone who's in a rural community, and I guess we have to think about the culture of that like group. Like when I try to put myself in that perspective, and I've spent time with people like that. I've had family friends where I've stayed there for the summer and like got to experience that culture and like get to know those people more. And so, they are still just human beings. And just from what I remember of that, and also trying to put my perspective into their perspective, there's a strong community like centered around the church basically, and Christian ideals, but it's more than just a religion itself. It ties in that community together. It's you could say it's not just a religion, it's a culture, and it sort of weaves in the norms and the morality and all that stuff. So
Shared values.
shared values, and when people get sick, the whole community comes together. That's tied in with that. So
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've thought about because I I had somebody ask me, because I disclosed to them that I'm atheist, but I'm comfortable talking about religion, and they were like, "So, do atheists like get together and like sit around and talk about how they don't believe in God?" And I was like, I guess on the internet, kind of, but no, there's not like a building we all go to and we're like, yeah, let's sit around and talk about how much we don't believe in something and like build a sense of community around that. No. So I think in that sense, it does like, it can be more isolating to like not have that.
and that's an interesting. It's funny how that person brought that up because they're probably for their reality, their norm. It's like, yeah, the church is part of the community, and without the church, there isn't much of a community. And so that they're probably thinking like, huh, like what's life like outside of that? Like, do you have
Yeah.
that? I could see how they could think about that. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. So,
that's funny. Maybe
yeah,
there could
it
be an
was kind of
atheist meeting group talking about
funny.
talking about how God doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I don't know, wouldn't that get boring after a while? It's just like, yeah, like we're all here for the same reason. Like maybe we should start a chess club or something.
Yeah, man. Maybe it would just be like a science group. Maybe that is pretty much what that is. A
Yeah, I
science
don't know if I
nerdy
would
group.
want to show up every week for that though.
But yeah, like so that kind of culture you could say it's like that's going to reflect so their experiences are going to reflect their values and it's going to show in what they vote for and um, what their priorities are. Those sets of priorities, that set of priorities is going to be different from someone living in like an urban setting. Um, it's just a totally different culture, you know, or someone who's
Yeah,
been through higher education or works in the
yeah,
tech industry, or you know, it's like these are different worldviews.
yeah. I think it's hard too, because like, we're still evolved to like be living in tribes. Like the
Mhm.
way that life is set up right now is not like favored towards the way that humans have evolved. And so that probably contributes to it being harder to come together um,
Yeah,
and being, on Zoom and, other like teleconferencing during the pandemic. I mean, like, folks are like just starting to come back to in person, at least, with peer work. Some of it had to always happen in person, but in terms of like, you know, team meetings and stuff, like for a long time, that was still, happening over Zoom because it's like, oh, we
yeah,
can't have this large group of people in one place. And it's tough.
it's tough. I mean, there are researchers who are talking about how connection is so deeply tied in with mental health. Like, if you're lacking connection, you're more prone to suffering from mental health challenges.
Yeah.
And if, and then there's that WHO study as well of communities in third world countries and the prevalence of mental health conditions there
Hmm.
versus prevalence in like Western first world countries. And for a lot of those communities,
Yeah.
like even something like the diagnosis of schizophrenia, like those communities tend to see higher recovery rates. And the speculation hypothesis around that is it's mostly due to the strength of those communities.
Yeah. And I would also think like how the people around them are reacting to it.
Yeah,
Um,
right. The culture of the community itself, like how they value things. Like if they value non-ordinary experiences, or if they demonize those experiences. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, like, I think, and this could be a massive overgeneralization, but I'll just say for myself, like, if somebody had just been like, okay, Nybelle, just like lay on the ground and like talk as much as you want, and maybe we'll like cycle some people in and out of here to listen to you, but just, do your best not to like wander off and, we'll bring you some food or whatever. And I
yeah.
probably would have been cool after like a few weeks of just like
Mm-hmm.
blah, 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 like letting it all out. And I do, wonder for other folks when the reaction is labeling, diagnosing, medication,
Mm-hmm.
is, you know, are we really like doing that person a favor? The problem is we don't, just because the way like our society is set up, we don't have capacity to do that. um,
Yeah, and that's in part because people in the field aren't getting paid enough, and so it's attracting less talent. I hate that word.
yeah.
It's attracting less people who want to work in that
Yeah,
field.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, there's it does not even a matter of talent anymore, just like warm bodies.
yeah,
it's Yeah,
no
and
burnouts and
yeah, well, it's been underfunded for a very long time, and just very recently, at least in Oregon, starting to fund it more. But then now you're fighting inflation
yeah,
because it's like, oh yeah, wages have gone up, but then so has the cost of everything else too.
it clicked into place for me recently too that for a lot of these agencies that work with people who are considered like quote unquote severe, people who have higher needs, a lot of the people who work in these agencies, it seems like a lot of them are still pretty new out of school. It's like the ones who are new and maybe incentivized to get their student loans forgiven at some point if they work for a nonprofit for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like, unfortunately, like they usually end up working with, like, you could say the highest needs people in the most challenging cases, whereas that's probably more
Yep.
appropriate for someone um, like someone like that who's mostly going off of like book education and maybe some degree of internship. Um, they're probably going to be less prepared for that. And so it's like the
Yeah, I
opposite.
mean,
It's like
it's
flipping
all
it.
backwards because you get paid more to work with folks who are like live in the suburban life, maybe
Right.
have challenges that they need to talk about, but generally there's not going to be as many like escalations, crises, behaviors that can be really challenging to navigate.
It's very
So,
true. And you can generally choose your own
yeah.
clientele. Like, if
Yeah.
you don't want to work with someone, like, you can turn people away. So it's like the reverse of what it should be. And I'm not saying this either to say that um, education is mostly what matters. Because like a peer who has like that lived experience, they're going to be more prepared, honestly, to work with a person who has lived experience with an extreme state. Just for example, is going to be more prepared to work with someone else who has that than a student who's fresh out of university and just like
Yeah.
hitting the ground running, like,
Yeah,
because it's the
and
lived experience and you could say the practical hands-on experience that is what prepares people.
yeah, totally. And I also think that peers do so much emotional labor as a part of their jobs. I'm not saying
Yeah,
that
yeah,
other roles don't, but it's like we have to be vulnerable like emotionally vulnerable as a
hmm,
part of our jobs, and then also like educate other staff on like what our job is,
yeah,
and also like potentially work with some of the most more challenging populations to work with, and then get paid the least usually.
yeah, yeah, yep. Yeah. So it kind of, I mean, both of us saw this experience where we worked at the crisis center. We saw our team unionize, and that was the first time that that there was any unionization at that agency. Like that was ground
Yeah.
zero. So I think that could be one example of kind of what I was talking about earlier of the collective coming together and making decisions about like, hey, this isn't working. What would work for us? Like a union is a good example of that on
Yeah.
sort of just like a really uh, local scale.
Yeah, and that is something. I don't know what kind of efforts have been made, but I do know that there was a presentation at Peer Apocalypse, which I want to go back and watch the recording of because I wasn't able to go to it. But there was a presentation about peers unionizing, um, and that is definitely something that I think could be explored more, and I would like to learn more about it. Um,
Yeah. Do you know which peer agencies in this area, this region, are unionized? I shouldn't say peer
I
agency.
don't
Peer
know.
agency.
I mean, I think that,
I know Cascadia. Well, I
yeah,
think Cascadia is right.
I think Cascadia is unionized, but that's not just the peers. That's everyone there, I think, as far as
This
I
is a
know. But
question. This is a question I have
I'm
for you.
not familiar with the local, like, which places have unionized.
Yeah, yeah. I was leaving our team right when we first unionized, and so you got to like experience it more. Did you notice?
Yeah, it was. I was in a weird position with that though because I was half-time supervisor in a different part of the organization, so they like didn't want to include me in the union. It was weird. I was like, but I'm not supervising this team, so I don't know. It's kind of a strange
Gotcha,
situation.
gotcha. I didn't realize.
But I was still like kind of on the sidelines for some of it. But then I was like, so what happens if people strike? I'm just supposed to be like the only one who comes into work? I don't know.
Which is still weird because, like you said, you were still on the team and you were
Yeah.
half-time supervising, but you weren't really. You weren't even supervising our team. You were supervising other locations.
Yeah. So I think there was a misunderstanding with the union. Like they didn't really get what I was saying. But
Yeah.
um, all of that aside, it was very interesting to see. Um, and I looked at a job posting for that place recently, and it's so funny how, you know, management was like, this isn't going to change anything. They're just going to take your union dues and you're not going to get anything out of it. And it's like, there's a lot more benefits there now. And the pay's a lot better. And it's like, yeah, if I had gotten a $7 swing differential when I was still working there, I might have stayed on swing and not switched my schedule. Like, that sounds really nice.
That's a big difference. $7?
Yeah, because before it was like 50 cents. So I'm
Yeah.
like, So
Wow.
anyway.
That is blowing my mind.
Yeah, so that's just one example of like, hmm,
Yeah.
massive doubts.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think because the hard thing is a lot of folks who are working in peer jobs, like, this is their first time being in the field at all. And so there's a lot of things that people don't know. Like, some folks might not even realize that unionizing is an option for peers or have no idea of like what the steps are to work towards that. I mean, like, I'm kind of familiar with the process, but like I wouldn't really know how to get people together around that. And I'm also in management, so I'm like, I'm still pro union. I don't care, but I wouldn't be a part of that in where I'm currently at.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. I'm curious because the union that was at our agency, so it was basically all the staff that we had there were under the same union, like one union together. And I'm curious what your experiences were or what your perception was around. Did you feel like peers were represented as equally as other team members in the union?
I feel like I can't fully speak to that because I never went to any of the union meetings. So I do know that there was a peer there who would regularly attend those union meetings. And I also had, after I left that organization, I did have one of our former coworkers reach out to me and ask some questions about the pay scale where I currently work for peers versus QMHAs. So where I currently work, the pay for peers and QMHAs is the same. So there's no like, oh, peers get paid less. And so what was happening with the union is they were wanting to, there was kind of like this disagreement around like, they still wanted peers to be paid less because of like less education or whatever, and then, like have it be like tiered up in that way. And I was like, well, first of all, you can be a peer, you can have a peer certification and have your QMHA. So, like, if you really want to go that route, you could say, okay, like pay them a little bit less until they get their QMHA in 3 years, and then bring it equal. But I don't know, it's ridiculous too, because if you look at like the billing rates in Oregon, peer support is a little bit less than case management, but it's not, I don't think there's a difference. Like if it's a peer billing or a QMHA billing for the same codes, I don't think there's a difference.
For peer, for peer billing, so the codes I've been using, it's about a $60 difference per hour.
Are you talking about for peer support versus case management, or if it's a peer support billing? What I'm talking about is like, say you have a peer support who bills for skills training and a QMHA who bills for skills training. It's going to be the same amount that you get back, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, as long as they're following the same coding, then yeah, it'll be the same amount.
Yeah, so that's the part where I'm like, even though the specific peer support billing code might be a little bit less, it's not like everything that peers bill for is reimbursed at a lower rate. So that's where I'm like, you should still be able to pay them the same.
Yeah. I mean, peers can bill. For those who don't know, I've been doing independent billing, so I've been, I've been submitting my own claims and getting to know how that system works. And peers can bill for direct, straight up peer support, skills training, and case management, as far as OHA is concerned.
Yeah. So, I don't know what the outcome was there, but hopefully it was favorable. And it sounds like they were trying to make sure that peers were equally represented and not just like still at, lowest ranked, quote unquote.
Yeah. That whole situation with like them getting lower pay, was that, you said that's what they wanted? When you say they, are you talking about like the union staff, or are you talking about like the other teams?
I don't think it was the other teams. I think it was what was going on with the negotiations between the union and the organization. And so I don't know if it was the union itself or that was like the justification that the organization was like coming back with during the negotiation. But yeah, that's all I can really speak to on it. I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I wasn't like really involved with that.
Yeah. I do want to speak to this point about experience, though, because honestly, it's something I think I can say it's something I've personally had an insecurity about and have had to, and sometimes still have to, like, kind of do some inner exploration and be like, okay, that's a false belief. Here's a new belief. But this belief that peers have less education than, say, other people. And in some sense, that is true. Like, I mean, obviously a peer doesn't necessarily have the same education as a clinician, some might, some peers do have advanced degrees. So that's a generalization. But even that aside, like just a person who's had direct experience with, let's just say, I'll just throw out an example, a peer who's been hospitalized and directly knows what it's like to go through that process, to get admitted, to just to be in that kind of setting, and then to be released and have to like reintegrate into the community, and have to, in some cases, like learn new skills to be able to function and cope, and to find community and find connection and learn wellness and recovery strategies, or find a sense of purpose so that they can then build a life for themselves. Like, that's a lot of stuff, and that is education, like learning how to do that.
Yeah.
So it's like, not everyone has had that experience.
Yeah, I try to say, like, formal education, you don't need a formal education other than your high school diploma to become a certified peer. But yeah, we have been educated in many other forms,
Yeah.
street cred, or like, you can't really learn to navigate some of these systems from a book.
Yeah.
And like the way that I can, use certain language to get what I need when I'm starting with a new provider, that's just something I've learned through experience. So yeah, I've definitely like experienced that insecurity too about not having as much formal education. But yeah, it's also important to remember, like, I know quite a few peers who have their masters. I also ran into a peer who used to be a doctor. Like, he had his doctorate and decided he didn't want to do that anymore and started working as a peer. So yeah, we don't always want to assume that that's going to be the case, and it's, I don't know. I think people can get elitist about it, like, you don't know what you're talking about because you don't have the fancy degree. And on the flip side, like, I think because I have my bachelor's in psych, which I think is kind of useless, to be honest, I think that even just that comes with like a little bit more authority in like things that I have to say, and that's weird personally. And I think also because, like, I had to write papers, I had to read research and do those things, like, it's kind of like I know a little more how to like speak that clinical language and understand it and navigate that a little bit easier than somebody who hasn't had that.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think
skills. And it's like, I wish employers looked more at the skills. Some do, but I wish you could say the culture around workplaces was more focused on the skill set rather than the education, because they don't always equal the same. And someone can still have an education and not have a very good skill set. I mean, that happens too. And for example, like, and this can apply to a lot of things, but like, let's say a therapist who went through got the regular degree but doesn't know how to process trauma with people. And if you're working with people with a lot of trauma and that skill set isn't there, it's like, yeah, that's...
Yeah, or therapists who don't know how to talk about suicide.
Or that, yeah, exactly. And I wanted to... Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, this is just something I was thinking about the other day, because I was helping with some slides for a different organization on how to just introduce and educate on what the peer role is. And the person who wrote it isn't working there anymore, and I was just like kind of providing some consulting. And there was a slide in there that said, peers may not know how to deal with suicidality in their clients, or whatever it said. And I was like, bro, there are a lot of people in the mental health field who don't know how to talk about suicide, not just peers.
Exactly.
And I have like seen some of that incompetence firsthand. So that is a widespread problem in the field of mental health, because you, at least the way it used to be, was you didn't have to get training on that. You had to seek
Mhm.
out your own training in addition to that master's degree to navigate those conversations around suicide. And so I had some reactivity reading that, and I was like,
Yeah.
please, you know, the there should be training around like how, if you're working as a part of a team, like how do you want to navigate those situations? Because I don't think it's helpful if one person on the team has a different response to when somebody brings that up versus other roles on that team. I think there should be coordination and some unity around like how are we going to address this when it comes up. But I don't think we should, what if the peer has dealt with thoughts of suicide or suicide attempts themselves?
Yeah.
They might be the best person to talk to about that.
Yeah, exactly. That there's this concept by Ken Wilber. He has this map of um, I'm trying to think of the best word for it, reality experience. Um, Ken Wilber's this guy who was a philosopher and talked about basically integral theory, which was um, him trying to connect different systems of thought and philosophies together. And there's a map of how he divides up experiences. There's internal, external, those two quadrants, and then there's individual and collective. And so the way I kind of see it too with the value of peers is like it's the internal individual category of lived experience that it has a difference to it than, I mean, we all know this, like there's a difference between lived experience and like book knowledge, but just the idea that it's like the whole idea is that we need all four quadrants in order to have like optimum wellness. Like we need to be looking at all four categories. We need to be looking at the individual. We need to be looking at the collective context. So like that person's community, society, culture, and ecosystem, because all of those are going to have impacts on that person's well-being. We need to look at the external, which is, you could say, the environment, but also their biology. External is just like also physical, so their biology, maybe their nutrition, hormones, whatever, all the technical stuff. And then the subjective elements of the person too, like thoughts and feelings and experiences. So I'm sorry, actually, I misspoke earlier. It's subjective, objective, and then individual and collective. So the peer brings that subjective element to it that someone, it's a qualitative difference from like the experience of being suicidal and all of what that entails. It's a qualitative difference from reading about it and understanding about it in theory, and or even more than that, like someone who is like scanning the brain of a person who's suicidal and doing blood tests on them and measuring their hormones and measuring their neurotransmitters and coming up with like an assessment based on that. Which we don't see in psychiatry, but let's just pretend that was in psychiatry. And I actually wish,
Sure.
I genuinely wish that would be part of psychiatry. I would be totally down for that because we need that. We need that. We need to see what's going on with the biology, and we also need the other three quadrants too. And ideally, I think we would have, this is what Ken Wilber advocates for, that we would have an integral model. We would have all four quadrants included in assessments of people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, I don't know if science is far enough yet for us to be able to do that with um,
Some places are.
psychiatry or.
It's still in its infancy. I mean, for one, there's a lack of funding in it
Mm,
because honestly, a lot of funding is going towards psychopharmacology. So it's not really more funding is going towards that and less towards other things. Um, but there are definitely like some promising approaches. There's SPECT imagery, SPECT that Amen Clinics is using. It's basically
mm,
like they're doing it's a less invasive imaging of your brain, and they have a database where they've correlated different conditions with different, you could say, brain image constellations. And so, in theory, they can assess you just doing a brain scan, but like I said, it's still in its infancy. It still needs
mm,
some more research. Um, there's QEEG where they're taking like electrodes, putting them on your head, and measuring your brainwave patterns. And
mm.
some of the more sophisticated tools for that, they do have an assessment feature. It's not used to formally diagnose, but they can tell patterns too.
Yeah, it would be good to have some more tools. I remember like when I was experiencing an altered state and I was in the hospital, I was insisting on an MRI, like really insisting on one because I was like, something's wrong, I have all this stuff going on. And after I had it done, they were like, it looks normal. And I remember thinking, how the hell does it look normal when I've been like hearing voices and like having these like beliefs of things happening that are not happening? And I mean, I was still in the middle of that state, so I was like, what is the heck is this? Um, so yeah, that was a little bit odd. I was like, how could I be like going through all of these things that are so far outside of my norm
Hmm.
and the MRI looked normal?
To me, I'm not surprised because um, so as a hypnotist, I know that they're like a really skilled hypnotist can make someone see an experience that isn't part of consensual reality. Like they can make
Mm,
someone see like a white rabbit in the room
mm,
that other people aren't seeing, and that person isn't like mentally ill when they're in that state. They're in a trance,
mm.
and hypnosis can even be used for like negative hallucinations, like to not see a chair in front of you that everyone else sees. So stuff like that.
Mm. Interesting.
And then even looking at the neuroscience of just ordinary perception, like ordinary sensation, um, like visually, for example, like our brain is constantly filling in so much around of the world. Like I was thinking about this. I've been thinking about this actually this week a lot. It- Um, so even if you just think of how light reaches our eyes, like
Mm,
so right now I have no lights on in the room and there's light coming from the sun. So that's the only light source right now, and it's coming into this room and it's illuminating everything. And if you think of how strange it is that that light is coming into this space, and there's literally a sea of light that's hitting these two spots right here, but
mm.
everywhere
Yeah.
in this room, and somehow it's creating some kind of cohesive, stable image. Like that doesn't make any sense. Our brain is filling in a lot of the holes, and it's doing this
Yeah.
constantly, moment to moment. It's never not doing that.
Yeah, that's why you can create optical illusions because our
Yeah,
brain tries to fill in the holes and weird things happen.
exactly. And that's, like um, when someone's sleep deprived, they might see some perceptual distortions.
Yep. So maybe I was in a 2-month trance.
Yeah, some hypnotists say that everyone's in a trance all the time. It's just the trance is changing.
That's trippy. I don't
Yeah.
want to think too hard about that one. So, what do you think the steps are that the peer movement needs to take to like come more together, like be more unified in general?
All I can say, the only thing that so far seems clear is what you said before. Sometimes it takes crisis to bring people together.
Hmm.
So, um, and even earlier today, I was kind of thinking about this in relation to addiction, how it's like an addict doesn't change until they hit rock bottom, which means like
Hmm.
when their strategy for what they've been doing just no longer works, like at all, um, and everything's falling apart. And the only thing they can do at that point is try to rebuild. Um, I think that's true, like on a collective scale too. Maybe like crisis is sort of like that rock bottom, quote unquote. And for some people, maybe it takes that in order to push past our discomfort, because
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable making change and like stepping outside of what's normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it's hard. It's just so hard to imagine, like collectively, we've been through so much already. I'm like, what else do we need to go through
Yeah,
to to have that sense of unity? And what you said about addiction kind of made me think that I think, like, at least in Oregon, addictions peers are a lot more unified. At least, like, I get that sense. And I think there are a couple reasons for that. I think one is that a lot of times the stories are, they're not all the same, but I feel like there's more of a pattern in how the story of addiction plays out for folks. And, usually like leading to incarceration. That's not how it goes for everyone, but a lot of like really prominent peers that I know, uh, you know, in addictions, like that is a part of their story. Um, and I also think that uh, there's a lot more community with addictions than mental health, because think about like sobriety groups. It's not just like sitting around and talking, but also like going on fishing trips and barbecue and like getting together, hanging out, and that kind of thing. And like there's this big sense of community around that. um, I feel like we don't have that as much in mental health. There's some, I go to some support groups, and I think that is helpful for what it is, but it is really just focused on like a lot of times like problem solving around like a very specific thing
yeah.
and not always like just more so on that sense of community.
I love that you brought that up. Yeah, because it's even part of the recovery culture to, at least for like the 12 step groups, that one of the steps is to like sponsor someone else. And it's
Mm-hmm.
basically like it's built into that culture to give back and guide and support other people. And we don't really have that equivalent because like um, I think part of it is like the closest thing we have to that are, like you said, support groups. But because there are so many different kinds of like mental health conditions, like that means there are so many different kinds of support groups. And so there's not like there's that kind of like separation. And then on top of that, the support groups, um, all of them don't necessarily have like that same ethos or culture of like giving back and like sponsoring. So, sponsoring, and in
Yeah.
this case, it would be like, peer support. But like on a one-on-one level, yeah, maybe we could like, it sounds like we could probably take some tips from the CRMs. You know, seems like they have something
Yeah,
going there.
I think like part of what is hard about 12 step for me is, like people will say, oh, you don't have to be religious to do 12 step. Higher power can mean anything. And I'm like, I don't believe there is any higher power. I I hear the term higher power and it is meaningless to me. So I think like for some people they can't even wrap their minds around that
Yeah,
it's not just that like I don't believe in God. It's like that that is just not a frame of mind I can get into.
yeah.
Um, so
And it's a
I
little
wish,
disingenuous too, because like some of those higher
yeah,
steps like involve basically prayer. So it's like you can't
yeah,
get around substituting that.
yeah, and I just wish there was like more like that people could tune into like that sense of loyalty to their community without necessarily needing the or spiritual aspect. um, I think that probably my culture is what makes me very loyal as a person because for me like it's always been like family is everything. It doesn't matter if you're how pissed off you are at your family, they're your blood and like you gotta make up, get over it kind of thing. And obviously that isn't always a perfect system, but I think it speaks to why like I have like a strong sense of loyalty in my relationships and friendships that I that has not always been reciprocated.
That's a great point too. Culture, like honestly, Western, modern, quote unquote, white culture tends to be like very individualistic and doesn't honor loyalty as much. Like,
Yeah, and I mean, I like my dad passed away a couple years ago and we were not talking when he passed. So I do understand that like there may be situations where it's healthier to just not be in contact with certain people and them being family doesn't override that. I do think right now we're in kind of this weird like cutoff culture where it's just like you have a disconnect and then it's like, well, you're out of my life now. And then some people do that a lot. And I'm like, I
yeah,
don't know how you navigate the world just like cutting off all these relationships at the drop of a hat.
right. This is gonna sound really funny, but I was reflecting on this theme actually, and the context of the Lord of the Rings. It'd be a really geeky moment, so get ready for this.
Okay.
So yeah, I was like reflecting on sort of my takeaway message from the Lord of the Rings, and the way I was feeling into it is like, Frodo, he grew up with, I think it was his uncle Bilbo, right? That was his uncle?
I
Or
am so bad with names.
I think Bilbo was his uncle, the protagonist from The Hobbit, the original. And so like Frodo is growing up with basically being in the shadow of Bilbo and like holding him
Mm.
up as like this person that he respects and looks up to and maybe wants to be like, and like, oh man, Bilbo, he has all these stories and all these amazing things that happened to him and all, like the dragon that he fought and all this stuff. And so he's like growing up with this and he's living in this like very small community, the Shire, and where he hasn't personally had those experiences. Like he's been kind of holed off and isolated in this Shire. Maybe that's quote unquote suburb. I don't know. um, so like he hasn't had those adventures yet, and so he's
Mm.
kind of. And I think actually a lot of millennials can relate to this. Um, this feeling of like maybe this message like you can do anything or you have this potential or
Mm.
whatever, like um some of us have heard this message and then grown up without having really had the experiences and adventures that would push us and expand us. That's not. Anyway, let me go back to Frodo and I'll come back to that. Digression. That's not completely true, but so Frodo, yeah, growing up in the Shire and having this longing, I think, to like prove himself and to maybe this questioning of like, do I have what it takes that Bilbo had too? Do I have that in me too? And the whole calling of, Gandalf coming in and the ring and trying to take it to the mountain to destroy it, like that whole calling, that was like the adventure, the opportunity presenting, and in other words, like that's like leaving your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the whole message, like the way it all kind of wrapped around, like the message that was infused through the whole story that expresses itself in so many different ways, so much so that it makes it really rich and like deep, is that no one does that alone. Like this is how I wanted to bring it back to the millennial thing. So, so it's like there's maybe Frodo, he was in some ways thinking like, oh, he's heard about these friends and allies that Bilbo had, but he's also kind of maybe thinking like, but that was something that was Bilbo's own strength and uniqueness and whatever, like something that maybe I'm missing, like something he had that maybe I'm not sure if I have or not. So it was more the focus on personal qualities, and through the whole adventures he went on with the Fellowship of the Ring, until the very part where like he's at the very last of it, and then his friend Sam has to save him from Gollum and the spider. Like, like at that point Frodo was helpless. Like he could not go further, and his friend, his ally, saved him. And that's what helped him get to the mountain to finish his mission. And that was the moment where maybe before like he appreciated everyone and the whole journey, but maybe that's when it really hit, when he was close to death, that he recognized, shit, like no one can do this by themselves. No one's supposed to do this by themselves. This life, adventures, missions, it's a collective effort. It's like Bilbo, he did what he did, but not because he did it by himself, because he was with this amazing group of people. Maybe that was the moment that was Frodo's realization. And you could say that was like, that was his climax on the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Just that recognition.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard that life doesn't, go so, like, isn't as nicely narratively formatted.
Yeah.
I do think that, I do think that, like, a crisis point or near-death experience can tell you, like, who your real friends are, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And when that happens, like, it's like that's when you realize that this lie we were told since we were young, that we have to do it on our own, that we're only worthy if we can suck it up and find our own strength and do life on our own. It's total bullshit. It's not. It's actually really unhealthy. And it leads to shame, and it leads to imposter syndrome and thinking like, well, do I have what it takes to get through this? Like, can I do this? But that's coming from a mindset of like, I have to do this by myself. I have to start my own business by myself. I have to become successful by myself, whatever it is, even like achieve wellness and health by myself. But it turns it on its head when you kind of consider like, oh, maybe like no one can do it by themselves. Like we all need somebody.
Yeah. And it's tough out there because like I have been realizing that for myself. Like I consider myself to be pretty ambitious, and for a while I was like, I need a mentor, like I need someone to teach me all the things so I can like go off and do them. And I think like that has shifted to I will have many mentors and it will kind of like ebb and flow. I think it's also hard for people to. It just seems like nobody has capacity for anything like that right now. I'm like, I
Yeah.
want to learn, I want to grow, and everybody's like, sorry, I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
um,
I wonder
and you
what
know,
from
that's not. It's not always that way, but like I said, it kind of ebbs and flows. Like I will learn little bits and pieces from people who I happen to be around at the time and try to ask questions rather than it being an assigned thing. And I
yeah.
also try to like be that mentor for others that I have, I've experienced that mentorship in the past and like I want to give back in that way, even though it's not like directly reciprocal. I want to do that for others. So I kind of like do that in the moment when I can. Um, but yeah, it would be nice to have more of a structure for that
Yeah.
because I don't know if that I'm like, how many other people out there have that mentality? I don't know. I don't know if others like think about it in that way or if they're just kind of like, well, I'm in whatever position I'm in now, so I just gotta like focus on what I need to do in whatever work that is. Um, I think
Yeah.
I'm always thinking about the bigger picture, even beyond whatever organization I'm currently working for. So I know that not everyone shares that mindset.
That's true. But I would be willing to bet that there are some who have that need, and it's maybe they're looking for like that kind of community. Like I kind of
Yeah.
wonder what it would look like to take like let's just say bits and pieces of what's working, like bits and pieces of what's working in like the 12-step groups, like maybe even just the idea of like a sponsor, like once you get to
Mm-hmm.
a certain point, it's like the ethos to sponsor someone else. Um, just different bits and pieces from different groups. There are some wellness groups I've been part of where there's a culture around like introspection and looking at our own like biases and stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
um, culture around like authentic expression, like sharing from a place, even if it's uncomfortable to do so, like sharing like honestly, authentically. Yeah, to bring some of those elements into like a peer oriented group, like peer support for peers, kind of,
Yeah,
or even like
that would be cool.
maybe even that's thinking of it too small, like because I mean recovery isn't like recovery for CRMs. It's like it's so
Yeah.
integral to the whole process of that to think of peer support is integral to this, like, and mentorship is integral to this. Like, I guess this would this could maybe look two different ways. Like on the one hand, it could look like an affiliation of different wellness groups with different themes, like different experiences of mental health, but they're all
Mm-hmm.
kind of still under the same umbrella with the same, you could say, guiding principles and ethos. Or it could look like one overall self-actualization or wellness recovery group where it's totally diagnosis neutral and it's more about like
Mm-hmm.
general principles to like living well and finding connection and wellness.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is like, even if something feels small to start with, it's like more than we already had, and you can always build on it.
Hmm.
So that's something to think about too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just brainstorming, but that's the,
Yeah.
yeah, it has me curious. Like, what if there was a group like that? Like basically the mental health or the wellness version of sobriety groups, sort of.
Hmm. I know there's Emotions Anonymous, but I've never been,
Oh,
so I
yeah.
don't know what that's like either.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, even, like you were saying, like the focus on a higher power when it comes to like formal 12
Hmm.
steps, it's like, it's not totally inclusive. Um,
Yeah.
so like so that would probably be a principle like that wouldn't, doesn't have to be incorporated, but it could be, yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking like could pull from different things. I know like with the CS, with like some of the CSX movement and Hearing Voices Network and stuff like that, they brought together like resources straight from the community itself,
Mm.
like questionnaires asking everyone like what works for you for navigating your experiences, and then like pulling all that stuff together. Um, so like that's like one thing they've done. Um, yeah, I wonder what that would look like with like different people coming, different people coming together who are trying to find wellness and being like, what's worked for you already, what hasn't worked, um, what are things that we could experiment with that seem promising, and just what's like a code of conduct or like an ethos we can have, together that can guide us,
Yeah, I mean,
you know?
that could be interesting. I mean, I guess like kind of what I'm thinking is like Pure Apocalypse has been something where that's an opportunity where a lot of peers come together every year, but there's not like a continuation of it. So I guess it would be cool to like Pure Apocalypse could be an opportunity to like introduce this idea and be like, you know, from those attending, like how do we do, how do we do this? Like how do
Yeah,
we like we have this great sense of community here. How do we like continue that over the course of the year when we're not all in one place physically?
yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm
Well,
just thinking too that like with 12 steps, the founder of that just kind of went ahead and like wrote wrote up the book like on his own. I'm not sure if he had any influences on it. I'm sure he did. I'm sure it didn't just come out of thin air. But um,
I'm finding that a lot of things in mental health were like co-opted from indigenous people, so
yeah,
like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and other stuff I'm not thinking of
mm,
right now. So I'm not saying that's what it is, but it's happened enough times. It could be.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of co-optation. Like mindfulness is technically a co-optation. You know,
Yoga.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
DBT. Half of DBT is co-opted.
Yeah, I mean.
Well, maybe not half, but part parts of it.
Right.
Yeah, acceptance commitment therapy. Some aspects of that are co-opted. Yeah,
Peer support.
peer
I
support.
mean, yeah. I
Hmm.
I mean, I think some of that is it's shifts, it's the shifting thing, it's changing and it's going to vary depending on what the setting is.
Yeah.
Um so I'm getting kind of hungry, so we should wrap up soon.
Okay. Yeah.
uh,
Any closing statements?
Closing statements. Yeah, I mean, like we need a more sense of community with our peer, I think just mental health in general, like how do we tap into that sense of community and how do we all come together as a peer workforce? Those are like really interesting things to think about. And I think like personally, this conversation speaks to me a lot because I've been trying to just in general get more in tune with a sense of community, like trying to figure out ways to meet people where I live and that kind of thing. And potentially try to find aspects of community that are not just peer, because I also don't want to be like all peer stuff all the time, which is kind of funny
Yeah.
doing a peer support podcast, but
I like how you
I think it's
I like
healthy
you
to have
brought that up.
balance.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it shouldn't be, well, it doesn't have to be someone's whole life. To bounce off
Yeah.
that, I have one more question. Would you consider it, let's just say there are two possibilities. So on one hand is the way things are right now with peers entering this as a profession and getting paid. And then on the other hand, what if it was more like the 12-step model where it's like a non-professional, non-paid type of thing. It's just like a community-driven thing, and people, yeah, aren't getting paid. Like, and I'm just thinking with that second option, because obviously there are going to be people who are like struggling financially and trying to figure out their employment situation. That's one of the attractive things about peer support. It gives like employment, financial stability, and a sense of purpose to people who might not otherwise have it. So, like that is an important consideration. And also, I wonder if there was already a way that was built in, like just in a free, community-centered way, if it would almost be better for the focus to be more on like how can we support you in doing like what you want to do the most, like do you want to be an artist, do you want to be a computer programmer, do you want to like write a book and publish it, like more focus on like that.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that you run into with that is just like how society is set up right now, that everything is like financially driven, and yeah, you'd have to like set up different system. Like you could have like a peer commune or something where it's like everybody's like giving and receiving peer support. That sounds nice. You'd
It
have to
doesn't
figure
even
out
have
how
to
to
be a
make that
commune.
like,
It could
yeah,
be even like a community, like let's just say like people, just staying in whatever homes that they have. There's this sorry, my brain's operating faster than I can speak right now. Like networks of sharing like food and resources, and
yeah, and
I'm just
I mean, I think some of that does exist.
but it doesn't
It's
have to
just
all be in one
hard.
location.
Yeah, it's hard. Like I think there are pros and cons to both having, it being something that's paid or versus having it be, totally voluntary and volunteer kind of thing. Um, I think it, at least for me, past a certain point, because of the emotional labor piece, it becomes difficult to imagine like not being paid for that, and the exception being, in conversations that I have where like I know that's going to be like a reciprocal situation of
Yeah,
like, kind of like a peer support conversation that's friendly and you have that back and forth.
yeah, totally.
Um, I just think that, you know, the way it is with capitalism right now, it's going to be really hard to imagine what that looks like in a way where, folks are not getting paid. And I'm not saying there isn't a way to do it. It's just like people don't have enough energy right now. Like I think
Mhm.
it's like, how do we get that sense of energy back for those types of things? And I think some of that would require like totally flipping the entire system that we have right now, because it's
Yeah,
if you're working 40 hours a week, that's going to totally drain you. You know, whether you're working in the mental health field or not, that's going to drain you from the ability to provide that kind of support to others.
it is. It is. And this is the big question I've been really sitting with. Because I really want to see how this could be possible. I feel like it could be possible, but yeah, it might not be. It might not be clear right away just how, and it probably wouldn't be easy at all. But
Yeah, I
um,
mean, I
yeah.
think that like online communities could be more tapped into, because I have tried to look at like a subreddit, a Facebook group for peer workers, and it's like there were some, but the participation is extremely low.
Hmm.
And a lot of folks, like, there's one Facebook group I'm in where a lot of folks are, you know, really new to it. There's not like seasoned peer workers in those groups, you know, other than me, I guess. Like, not that I
Hmm.
know of. So I think that that is something that could be explored a lot more. Okay, so we're gonna wrap this up since it looks like Andrew's recording isn't working right now.
Sorry, guys.
Um, that's okay. So I have a wrap up icebreaker question.
Nice.
Um, what is something you thought would be a great idea but was terrible when you actually did it?
Ooh.
Oh, you're back.
Oh, I'm back. I'll let you answer this one first.
Okay, so oh god. There was this guy that I had a crush on for a long time, and we were like talking over Facebook Messenger for, you know, a couple of years. We had gone to a year of college together, and it was like, you know, when I told him how I felt, it was just like very like emotionally, it was a lot, you know, it was like
Hmm.
very strong connection. And yeah, going into that relationship was a terrible idea for a lot of reasons. I mean, I think I learned that high passion also means high volatility when you are fighting.
Yeah.
I value stability. And he just did not communicate very well about like his intentions of like I didn't realize going into the relationship that he 100% for sure was going to move out of state at the end of that year, and like there was just so many miscommunications going into that. I'm like it was like such a
Yeah.
bad idea, but my love chemicals overrode like asking about those types of things.
Yeah. I've definitely been there. um, Man. And it's a learning process too, right?
Yes. I learned a lot from that experience.
Yeah. So the question is, what did you do that you regret?
What is something that you thought was a great idea going into it, but it was actually terrible once you did it?
Yeah. That's a tough one for me because a lot of my life experiences felt so mixed, like lots
Mm.
of bittersweet experiences. I guess like going to PSU for some reason is coming up, and I think it's because I had such a great experience in community college. Like I felt like there was a lot of community
Mm-hmm.
there, like literally community, and it was really
Yeah.
easy. Yeah, that's the beauty of it. You know, it felt more intimate. It was really easy to meet and talk with people, and I made like a bunch of friends there. It was honestly that was like one of the best eras of my life. Like when I was in community college, that's one of
Mm.
the times I was like genuinely happy. And I guess I was going into like university with those same expectations. And at least when I went to Portland State, I was not met with those expectations in the same way. Like
Oh,
I met, I met a few cool people and had, some experiences here and there that were cool, but I would say all in all, like it wasn't anywhere close to community college for me. It wasn't nearly as joyful or creative or expansive. Like it was, and it actually felt really lonely a lot of the time. I felt very disconnected from the
mm.
school. So, but I was also going half
That's
time, and I wasn't
interesting.
like, I wasn't. Um, I lived close by. I lived just down the street from there, so like geographically, like I was like more involved there than at the community college. But yeah, I just felt disconnected from the community.
That's really interesting because like one of my best friends I met at PSU, and I had a lot of like going to community college. I also did meet a good friend there, but I had so many like attempted connections that just like did not work out at community college.
Mm.
Um, so that's interesting.
Yeah,
But I went to like different locations too, so maybe that contributed to some of that with community college.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I wonder if it's like if it's in your home state. Was it in your home state?
yeah,
Okay, because there might be.
so I don't
'Cause-
know.
yeah, yeah. When I went to community college, I grew up in Nevada. I was in Reno, but it was still Nevada. So I think there's
No,
yeah, maybe something around that too. Uh,
yeah, maybe. All right, well, if you've made it this far, thanks for listening. We'll see y'all next time.